The helicopter blew apart 50 meters above the ridgeline, its spinning rotors shredding into a blazing sphere that flashed across the Balkan peaks like a second sunrise. Staff Sergeant Mira Lawson threw herself behind a boulder as the shock wave punched through her chest, fragments raining around her as she hit the ground. Falcon 3 is gone. I repeat, Falcon 3 is gone. The pilot's transmission died mid-sentence while the flaming remains spiraled into the valley, taking her evac and 4 fellow Rangers with it. She grabbed her radio, trying to raise the 2 remaining birds from their insertion flight. Only static, then finally a faint, broken voice. All units, this is Falcon Lead. We're under heavy fire from multiple SAM sites. Extraction is impossible. You're on your own until we can shut down their air defense. Earliest window, 12 hours. Good luck out there. Mira scanned her surroundings. She was perched at 11,000 feet along a bitter mountain ridge deep in the contested Balkans, nearly 15 kilometers behind hostile lines held by a brutal paramilitary faction. Her 5-person ranger team had been hit the moment they arrived. 2 were already dead in the wreck. 2 more had fallen during the first burst of gunfire. Now she was the only one left. Her task: slip into enemy territory, identify a high-value target responsible for coordinating ethnic cleansing operations, and mark his location for an airstrike. The target was holed up in a fortified compound 3 kilometers farther up the mountain at 13,000 feet. Reaching it meant scaling vertical rock walls that her fallen teammates had been carrying gear for. All she had was her M4 with 8 mags, a sidearm, 4 grenades, and a radio that might work if she could climb high enough. What she didn't have was climbing gear, backup, or any logical chance of survival. But she still had one thing the enemy didn't account for: Ranger discipline and the iron refusal to let her team die for nothing. Engines growled below her, enemy patrols sweeping the crash site for survivors. Above her, the mountain rose like a frozen wall of stone and ice. Most soldiers would have given up or hidden. Mira began to climb. What unfolded over the next 8 hours would show that the deadliest force on any battlefield isn't firepower or manpower. It's a ranger with no option except finishing an impossible mission alone. But before we break down how she scaled a sheer mountain face while under fire, took out an entire compound with limited rounds, and called in an airstrike that shifted the operation's outcome entirely, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button, because this is Captain Joe's Stories, and this episode proves Rangers don't quit, don't back down, and never leave a mission undone. Now let's get into it. 06:30 hours. The ambush. Everything had gone sideways from the start. Intelligence had claimed the mountain compound would barely be guarded, maybe 8 to 10 fighters at most, but intelligence had completely misread the situation. When the trio of Blackhawks crossed the ridge at first light, they'd flown straight into a lethal trap, the sky erupting with surface-to-air fire. Falcon 3, Mira's bird, took a direct strike. She was hurled out by the blast, slamming onto the rocky slope and tumbling nearly 20 meters before grabbing hold of an outcropping. When she finally looked up, both teammates who had jumped with her were already gone. Mercer had landed wrong and snapped his neck, and Stevens had been shredded by the blast, bleeding out before Mira could even crawl to him. The remaining helicopters had scattered, barely limping over the ridge while under relentless fire. Now, at 06:45, Mira crouched behind a cluster of boulders 200 meters below the kill zone, running a cold assessment of her situation. Assets: an M4A1 with an ACOG and 8 magazines totaling 240 rounds, a Glock 19 with 3 mags for 45 rounds, 4 M67 grenades, a combat knife, a survival kit, a limited-range radio, and basic medical gear. Problems: 15 kilometers behind hostile lines in the Arcadia Mountains, no support for at least 12 hours, enemy patrols closing on the crash site, vertical rock faces ahead with no climbing gear, and the mission target still 3 kilometers higher at a fortified position, now fully alerted. Most operators would label the task suicidal. Mira considered it just another Tuesday. She checked her M4, confirmed her mags, and pressed uphill. The enemy would expect any survivor to retreat downslope toward friendly territory. She was heading toward the objective because Rangers don't abandon missions just because the world goes sideways. 700 hours, initial ascent. The first stretch wasn't technical, just brutal. Steep terrain, loose scree, and boulders. Mira moved quickly, hugging cover and keeping her profile low. Behind her, she heard the enemy patrol reach the wreck, shouting in Serbian and rough English. This faction was a blend of ex-military and foreign fighters armed with Serbian and Russian gear. At 11,400 feet, the terrain shifted again, becoming a sheer wall of rock, a climb meant for ropes, harnesses, and the equipment her teammates had been carrying. Mira studied it. 60 meters of exposed ascent to the next ledge system, sparse holds, patches of ice. A single slip meant death. She secured her M4 across her chest, tightened every strap, and began climbing. Free soloing wasn't something Rangers practiced often, but Mountain Phase had taught her enough. Test each grip, keep 3 points of contact, rely on your training, master your fear. Her fingers found a narrow crack and she pulled upward, one move, then the next. The rock numbed her hands, but she continued. 20 feet, 30. The drop widened beneath her, but she never glanced down. Doubt had no place here. At 40 feet, she caught voices rising from below. The enemy patrol had finally reached the spot she'd climbed from and saw her ascending the rock face. Gunfire cracked upward, AK-47 rounds sparking off the stone beside her. One shot whipped so close she felt its pressure, but at 40 feet up a sheer wall, hitting her would have required miracle-level marksmanship. She kept moving, 50 feet. The gunfire stopped once they realized they were wasting rounds, but now they were pushing after her. Mira could hear them scrambling up the slope, searching for a way to gain the high ground. She reached the 60-foot ledge, hauled herself over it, and immediately shifted into a defensive firing position. 4 hostile fighters were working along the slope below, trying to flank her. She knelt, shouldered her M4, and slowed her breathing. At this distance, with her ASOG and training, it was almost effortless. 1 round into the lead fighter, down. A second into the man behind him, down. The last 2 scattered, firing wildly uphill. Mira shifted slightly, tracking the third as he lunged for cover. When he popped up, she was already on him. 1 round, down. The 4th stayed low, using solid cover and refusing to show himself. Mira waited, calm and cold. After 2 minutes, he made his mistake, sliding for a better angle. She put 2 rounds through the opening and ended it. 4 enemies down, but the gunfire would bring reinforcements. She climbed on. 7:45 hours. The technical ascent. At 11,800 feet, Mira reached the stretch that normally required full climbing gear. A 100-meter vertical slab of smooth rock with iced-over holds. Without equipment, this section should have been impossible. She stood at the base, studying the face that would make most people turn back. But she saw a line, a narrow crack running up the left side, barely visible, maybe a few centimeters deep. Crack climbing without protection was considered madness even among professionals. You jammed your hands into the crack and hauled yourself upward using raw technique and strength. One slip meant a fatal drop. Mira had trained for exactly this during mountain warfare courses. She'd climbed crack systems in Colorado, Washington, Scotland, learning how to read stone for holds others couldn't see. She entered the crack. The first section required hand jams, wedging her hands deep and using friction and pressure to lift her body. It was vicious on the skin, demanded brutal grip strength, but rangers don't complain. She moved upward, one jam at a time, feet smearing on polished rock, catching tiny edges others wouldn't notice. 20 meters. 30. Her hands tore open, blood slicking the rock, but she didn't slow. Stopping meant falling. Falling meant failing the mission. At 40 meters, she heard helicopters, enemy M8s, circling overhead, sweeping the area. One passed directly above her, close enough that she saw the door gunner searching the slopes. But he never looked straight up. Nobody imagined someone would be free climbing a vertical wall during combat. 50 meters. The crack narrowed, forcing her to switch to finger locks. Only her fingers wedged into the stone, pulling her full weight with sheer finger strength. The kind of climbing that wrecks hands, and that most climbers wouldn't attempt even with ropes and gear. Mira pushed on because the mission demanded it, and rangers don't quit just because something is brutal. 70 meters up, she could finally see the top of the wall, 20 more to go. Her forearms felt like they were on fire, her fingers screaming with every move, but she didn't slow. At 90 meters, 10 from the top, she heard voices directly above, enemy fighters waiting at the ledge, having climbed an easier route on the backside. She couldn't stop, couldn't retreat. The only path was straight into whatever waited at the top. At 95 meters, with just 5 left, a boot appeared over the edge. An enemy leaned over, spotting her. "American here!" he shouted, bringing an AK-47 muzzle down toward her. Mira pulled off a maneuver that would later be retold for years in training circles. She let go with one hand, drew her Glock 19 from her thigh holster, and fired 4 rounds upward while clinging to the wall by a single jammed hand, nearly 100 meters above the ground. The fighter toppled backward, his rifle tumbling past her as she holstered her pistol and kept climbing. She pulled herself over the edge just as 2 more fighters rushed in, raising their weapons, but Mira was already moving. She rolled over the rim, brought her M4 up, and dropped both with controlled bursts. More shouts followed, an entire patrol, maybe 8 to 10 fighters, closing in. Mira scanned the terrain in 2 seconds. She was on a narrow ledge boxed in by rock walls, a perfect kill zone. Above her stretched another 200 meters of steep slope leading to the next plateau. Below her was the 100-meter drop she had just climbed. The enemy was coming from the only open direction. She yanked 2 grenades from her vest, placed them on the ground with the spoons held tight, then pulled the pin on a third and hurled it toward the incoming fighters. She counted. 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. The blast thundered across the mountainside, followed by screams and chaos. As they reeled, Mira released the spoons on the 2 grenades at her feet and sprinted up the incline above the ledge. The detonations triggered a rock slide on the unstable slope, sending tons of rock crashing down and sealing the route behind her. The patrol was cut off. Finding another path would take them hours. Mira kept climbing, Aero 900 hours, closing on the compound. At 12,400 feet, she found an overlook with a clear view of her target. She was 600 meters away, slightly lower in elevation. Through her binoculars, she confirmed the intel had only been half right. There was a compound carved into the mountainside, fortified, sprawling, nothing like the lightly defended outpost she'd been told to expect. She counted 20 to 30 fighters, PKM machine guns, mortars, hardened bunkers built into rock, overlapping defensive positions, a mountain road on the far side for vehicle access, and communication systems, including satellite gear and technical vehicles with heavy guns. Somewhere inside was the HVT, the commander behind the ethnic cleansing operations that had massacred entire valleys. Her job was to mark the target for an airstrike, but with enemy air defenses active, no aircraft could get close. She needed those defenses neutralized. She studied the layout and spotted the SAM elements. 2 positions equipped with shoulder-fired systems, likely Russian-made Igla variants. If she eliminated them, the strike package could finally approach. One Ranger against a fortified stronghold with 30 fighters would make anyone else turn back. Mira began planning her assault. Then she noticed something she hadn't expected. A cluster of civilians, maybe 20, locked inside cages on the eastern edge. Villagers, captives from the raids. Her mission didn't include rescuing hostages, but calling in a strike while innocent people were trapped wasn't an option she could accept. The mission had just become even more complicated. 09:45 hours, the assault begins. Mira maneuvered into position 300 meters from the compound's eastern perimeter, the valley-facing side with fewer guards. They never anticipated a threat coming from the direction that required climbing sheer cliffs, so Mira found a rocky outcrop that offered concealment and perfect sightlines into the compound. She set her M4 with the ACOG in place and started ranking targets in order of importance. First up, the SAM crews. She spotted both launch points, one on the northern side, one on the southern perimeter, each manned by 2 fighters. Second, the guards watching over the prisoner cages, 4 armed men hovering near the civilians. Third, communications, and she quickly identified the satellite gear and antenna array, knowing taking them out would stop any call for reinforcements. Fourth, the heavy weapons teams. The PKM positions would shred her if she didn't neutralize them quickly. She had 8 magazines, 240 rounds, so every shot had to matter. Mira steadied her breathing, settled behind her rifle, and initiated the assault. Shots 1 through 2, Northern SAM, first fighter, center mass, down. Shots 3 and 4, second SAM gunner trying to swing his weapon up, 2 in the chest, down. Chaos rippled through the compound as fighters scrambled to find the shooter, unaware she was 300 meters away and partially hidden. Shots 5 through 7, Southern SAM, first man diving for cover. She led him, 2 hits, 1 miss, down. Shots 8 through 10. Second SAM gunner exposed himself while reaching for the launcher. 3 rounds, down. Both SAM sites eliminated, opening the airspace. Shots 11 through 13, guard tower near the cages. The gunner tried to bring a machine gun to bear, but 3 rounds dropped him from the platform. By now, the defenders understood they were under attack. PKMs roared to life, tearing into the rocks around Mira's former position. She ducked low and crawled 20 meters to a new angle, while hundreds of rounds chewed her previous cover apart. The PKM crews kept firing where she'd been. Shots 14 through 17, western PKM position. The gunner fully focused on the wrong spot. 4 rounds dropped him and his assistant. Shots 18 through 21, eastern PKM team already swinging toward her new location. She fired quicker, less refined, but lethal. 4 shots, both down. Heavy weapons neutralized, incoming fire intensified. AKs, another PKM she hadn't tagged yet, even a mortar dropping rounds dangerously close. But Phase 1 was complete. SAMs destroyed, Prisoner guards reduced. Time for Phase 2. Mira pulled her last grenade and lobbed it toward a cluster of fighters advancing along the slope to flank her. The blast scattered them, buying critical seconds. She broke from cover and sprinted, not away from the compound, but straight at it. The aggressive push caught them entirely off guard. They expected retreat, not a charge. She covered 50 meters before they adjusted, and rounds began cracking past her, hitting the dirt at her heels. At 250 meters from the compound, she dove into a shallow depression that shielded her from most angles. She had cut the distance in half. From here, her M4 with the ACOG was brutally effective. She began picking off targets one by one, fighters stepping into doorways, 2 rounds each, another on a rooftop, 3 rounds, a group forming a counterattack, controlled bursts into the center. She burned through her 3rd magazine and into her 4th. 120 rounds gone, around 15 fighters down, but more kept emerging. The compound held far more defenders than intelligence suggested. An RPG streaked toward her trench. She rolled aside as it hit, the explosion pelting her with rock and dirt. Her ears rang, but she stayed in the fight. Shots 60 through 65. Technical vehicle moving into position. Heavy gun mounting. She dumped half a mag into the exposed gunner and driver, sending the truck crashing into a wall. Her radio crackled. "Any station, this is Falcon Lead. Air defenses are down. We can provide KS if you can mark the target. Authenticate." Mira squeezed her PTT while firing at another emerging fighter. "Falcon Lead, authenticate Charlie 7-9er. I'm 250 meters east of the compound. SAMs are neutralized, but I've got civilians in cages on the eastern perimeter. Hold your strike until I extract them." Negative. Ground unit's mission is HVT elimination. Civilian rescue is not authorized. Falcon Lead, I'm not asking. I'm telling you I'm getting those civilians out before you drop ordnance. Give me 8 minutes. Ground unit, you don't have authorization to. Then court-martial me when I get back. But I'm not letting civilians die in an airstrike. 8 minutes. Parker out. She switched frequencies before they could argue again. Now she had to cross 250 meters of open ground, eliminate the remaining defenses, free the captives, and clear the strike zone. All in 8 minutes. Mira checked her ammo. 3 magazines left. They had to last. She sprinted straight toward the compound, firing on the move. A fighter appeared in a window. 2 rounds through it, no pause. Another stepped from behind a wall. She transitioned smoothly, fired, and kept running. At 100 meters, Mira drew her Glock 19 with her left hand, while her right continued working the M4, firing ambidextrously and engaging threats from both sides at once. 2 fighters dropped from her pistol shots. Another fell to her rifle. At 50 meters, she breached the compound perimeter. Close quarters battle now. She switched instantly into rapid room-clearing mode, slicing corners, checking angles, and eliminating threats as they appeared. A fighter burst from a doorway. She put 3 rounds into him before he could even lift his weapon. 2 more attempted a pincer ambush. She dove forward, rolled, and came up firing in both directions, both targets down. She reached the prisoner cages 25 meters from the eastern wall. 4 civilians huddled inside, terrified. The padlocks were simple. She shot them off with the Glock and yanked the doors open. "Go, run down the mountain! American forces are coming!" They stared at her, not understanding, so she switched to Serbian. "Idite! Bejite! Run!" That they understood. They fled downslope just as 3 fighters spotted her at the cages and advanced with weapons raised. The cages offered zero cover, nowhere to hide, so Mira planted her feet, raised her M4, and fought. 2 rounds into the first fighter, down. The second advanced while firing, rounds striking the cages, one tugging her sleeve, another slamming into her plate carrier. She ignored the impacts and put 3 shots into him. The third fighter was smarter. He found cover and laid down suppressive fire. She couldn't push forward or fall back. The civilians were still escaping behind her. She was pinned, low on ammunition, and fully exposed, until she heard it. The unmistakable thunder of an A-10 Warthog rolling in. Close air support had arrived early. Mira keyed her radio. "Falcon lead, civilians are clear, hit the main building, danger close, my position." "Copy. Guns, guns, guns." The A-10's GAU-8 Avenger spun up, unleashing a storm of 30mm depleted uranium rounds at 3,900 per minute. The sound was a deep, violent growl that shook the mountain. The main compound structure simply evaporated under the barrage. The fighter pinning Mira was caught on the edge of the gun run and erased. Main building destroyed. Marking for hellfires. Mira pulled her laser designator and painted the communications hub, where Intel said the HVT kept his command center. Target marked. Missiles away. 2 AGM-114 Hellfires streaked in. The first hit the comms building dead center. The second followed 2 seconds later, ensuring total annihilation. The blasts rocked the mountainside. But Mira wasn't done. Through the smoke, she saw movement. 5 fighters escaping through a rear exit carrying documents and equipment. One matched the HVT's description. They were trying to flee. Not happening. Mira sprinted after them, M4 ready. They saw her and opened fire. She dove behind a burning vehicle as rounds clanged off its frame. She rose and fired back, dropping 2 escorts instantly. The remaining 3 split. 2 ran toward the tree line, and the HVT broke for a vehicle. Mira tracked him through her optic, 50 meters, running hard. She controlled her breath, led slightly, fired. He stumbled but kept going. Armor. She fired again, lower this time, hit his leg. He crashed to the ground. His 2 remaining escorts turned back to help him, a fatal mistake. Mira fired controlled bursts and cut them down. She closed in on the HVT, weapon up. He reached for a pistol, she kicked it aside. "Don't move," she warned in English, then repeated it in Serbian. He froze, bleeding heavily. She zip-tied his hands and applied a tourniquet. Alive. He was far more valuable. She keyed her radio. "Falcon lead. HVT captured. Repeat, captured, not killed. Need immediate extraction. 1 prisoner, my location." "Copy. Blackhawk inbound. 2 minutes." Those 2 minutes stretched forever. Mira held security over the wounded HVT, scanning for new threats as the compound burned around them. Engines echoed up the mountain road. Enemy vehicles approaching. Reinforcements. "Falcon lead. I've got incoming vehicles. Need that bird now." 30 seconds. The vehicles came fast. 2 technicals with mounted machine guns, about 20 fighters. Mira had 1 magazine left, 28 rounds. The lead technical rounded a bend. She fired 10 rounds into the driver and engine block, sending it crashing into a tree. The second technical stopped at distance, its gunner opening up with a PKM, heavy rounds ripping apart the ground around her. Mira grabbed the HVT and dragged him behind the only solid cover left, a partially intact concrete bunker. Rounds slammed into the concrete, chipping away at the little cover Mira had left. She counted only 18 rounds remaining. 18 rounds against roughly 20 fighters and at least 1 heavy machine gun. The odds were terrible. And then she heard it. The heavy, rhythmic thump of rotor blades. The Blackhawk roared and low and aggressive, its door gunners already firing. The miniguns shredded the second technical and the fighters surrounding it. "Ground unit, we're landing hot! Get that prisoner aboard now!" Mira hauled the HVT up, threw him over her shoulder, and sprinted for the bird. Gunfire erupted from the tree line, but the door gunners cut it down with sweeping bursts. She shoved the HVT inside and jumped in right as the Black Hawk lifted off, rounds pinging harmlessly off the armored fuselage. They climbed fast, leaving the burning compound behind. The crew chief looked at her, dust-covered, blood-stained, uniform ripped to shreds, still holding security over the HVT with her last magazine. "Ma'am, you're bleeding." She glanced at her arm. "Flesh wounds. Plate caught the rest. I'm fine." The crew chief shook his head. "You scaled that mountain without gear, took on 30 fighters alone, saved civilians, captured the HVT. That's not fine. That's legendary." Mira didn't answer. Exhaustion hit her like a wave. She looked back toward the mountain she'd climbed and the ruin she'd left behind. Her hands were torn open from the ascent. She carried 3 minor gunshot wounds absorbed mostly by her plate carrier, and she'd burned through 212 rifle rounds, 33 pistol rounds, and every grenade she had. But the mission was done. The HVT was alive. 20 civilians were safe. Her team's deaths had been avenged. Only then did she allow herself to close her eyes. Aftermath. 1 week later, the captured HVT provided intelligence that led to 47 paramilitary leaders being arrested and stopped 3 planned mass killings. The documents recovered from the compound exposed an entire network of ethnic cleansing operations spread across 3 countries. The 20 civilians Mira had rescued testified at war crimes tribunals in The Hague, their statements helping convict multiple high-ranking war criminals, including 2 generals and a political leader who had overseen the atrocities. Without them, many would have escaped justice. Mira received the Medal of Honor for her actions, the nation's highest award. The citation detailed her free solo climb, her one-woman assault on a fortified compound, her rescue of civilians while under fire, and the capture of a high-value target after her entire squad was wiped out. At the White House ceremony, the families of her fallen teammates attended. Martinez's mother embraced Mira and whispered, "Thank you for finishing what they began. Thank you for giving their sacrifice meaning." During the press briefing afterward, a reporter asked where she'd found the strength to finish such an impossible mission alone. "Rangers train for the worst conditions imaginable," Mira answered. "We train for gear failure, for losing teammates, for being outnumbered and outgunned. What happened on that mountain was terrible, but it wasn't outside the range of what Rangers expect. My team started the mission. I finished it. Rangers don't leave missions undone, and we don't let our teammates' sacrifice go unanswered." Another reporter pressed her about exceeding her mission parameters, risking an airstrike to save civilians who weren't part of her assignment. "Rangers lead the way," Mira said firmly. "That means stepping into danger first, but it also means protecting what we stand for. I wasn't going to call an airstrike that would kill innocent prisoners locked in cages. My teammates wouldn't have wanted that either. We're warriors, but warriors with a moral compass. Sometimes the hardest part isn't the firefight. It's making the right choice when no one is watching, and no one would know if you didn't." Mira returned to the 75th Ranger Regiment, turning down transfers to training or staff jobs. She wanted to stay operational, wanted to keep leading Rangers in the field. But her story, the climb, the solo assault, the rescue, the capture, became legend across special operations. 6 months later, she was promoted to Sergeant First Class and given her own fire team. She trained them relentlessly in mountain warfare, gearless operations, and ethical judgment under pressure. During a mountain exercise in Colorado, when a ranger's rope snapped mid-ascent, the others immediately began setting up a complex retrieval system. Mira watched for 30 seconds, then simply began climbing. She free-climbed the face, reached the stranded ranger in 4 minutes, and brought him down safely without any equipment. Then she gathered her team. "Rangers don't wait for perfect equipment or perfect odds," she told them. "You train with gear to be proficient, but you train without gear to be unstoppable." That ranger was in danger. The fastest rescue wasn't a rope system, it was climbing. So I climbed. Rangers solve problems with whatever we have, even if all we have is training and our own hands. The young private she'd rescued later said, "I was hanging there terrified, sure I'd fall." The young private later recalled that moment vividly. "I looked down and saw Sergeant Mira Hale climbing up toward me with no rope, no harness, just her hands and boots digging into the rock." That was the moment he understood what being a ranger truly meant. It wasn't about fancy gear or ideal conditions. It was about finishing the job no matter what stood in the way. A small memorial now stands near the crash site, a stone marker engraved with 5 names: Martinez, Stevens, Johnson, Williams, and Harper, the Rangers who began the mission. Beneath their names sits a simple inscription: "Rangers lead the way." Mira visits that monument whenever she trains in the region, placing her palm on every etched name and making the same quiet promise. Your mission is complete. Your sacrifice mattered. You'd be proud of how it ended. But the monument that truly honors them isn't made of granite. It's built into doctrine, training, and mindset. The techniques Mira used, free climbing under fire, solo assault tactics, ethical decision-making when everything collapses, are now formal parts of Ranger instruction. The story spread far beyond special operations, reaching conventional units, allied militaries, and academies worldwide. It became a case study in more than tactics. It became a lesson in leadership, resilience, and maintaining moral integrity in conditions where most people would break. A year after the mission, Mira received a letter from one of the civilians she'd saved, a young woman named Elena, who had survived 3 brutal weeks locked in those cages. "You came down from the mountain like an angel of death to our captors and an angel of mercy to us," she wrote. "We had lost all hope. We believed we would die there, or worse. Then you appeared alone, wounded, fighting like something not human, and you freed us. You didn't need to. Your mission wasn't to save us, but you risked everything anyway. My children live because of you. My husband lives because of you. I live because of you. We will never forget. Thank you, Ranger." Mira kept that letter folded in her pocket on every deployment. When missions turned ugly, when decisions grew heavy, when the burden felt impossible, she would touch the paper and remember why Rangers do what they do. Not for medals or headlines, but for the people who need someone to stand between them and the darkness. They had left her stranded on a mountain at 11,000 feet with no team, no equipment, and enemies moving in from every direction. She climbed 2,000 vertical feet with torn hands, took out 2 SAM sites with precision fire, stormed a fortified compound with 30 defenders and barely enough ammunition, rescued 20 civilians while under fire, and captured a war criminal who would have slipped away forever. Because that's what Rangers do. They adapt, they overcome, and they finish the mission no matter the cost. They choose the harder right over the easier wrong, even when no one is watching. They refused to quit even when quitting would be the reasonable choice. And that mountain would never forget the day one ranger turned impossible into just another obstacle. The odds didn't matter. The situation didn't matter. The obstacles didn't matter. What mattered was the mission, the people who needed saving, and the creed hammered into her from day one. Rangers lead the way. Mira led the way up an impossible mountain, through an impossible fight, toward an impossible victory. And in doing so, she proved what every ranger believes deep down, but that mountain carved into stone. No challenge is unbeatable, no mission unfinishable, no situation hopeless. With training, willpower, moral courage, and the refusal to accept defeat, impossible becomes just another task on the list. Staff Sergeant Mira Hale climbed without gear, fought without support, and won without backup, because Rangers don't need perfect conditions. They just need a mission and the will to carry it through. That will, forged in training and tested in combat, is what sets them apart. Rangers don't accept impossible. They destroy it one mission, one mountain, one overwhelming situation at a time. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories every